The cold wind carried the smell of rain and dust through the narrow streets of Riverside. I pulled my worn-out brown coat tighter around me, the same coat I'd worn for over a decade. It wasn't much, but it had kept me warm through years when warmth was all I could afford. My name's Jeremy Collins, 59 years old, retired construction foreman, though most people didn't see that when they looked at me. They saw the rough hands, the patched sleeves, the tired face. The neighborhood kids sometimes called me the quiet man by the park. They didn't know I once built half the houses around this town. That afternoon, my daughter, Melissa, had called me with rare excitement in her voice. "Dad, I want you to come to dinner tonight. I want you to finally meet Ethan properly." I'd met him once before, a brief handshake at a holiday party, more formal than friendly. But for Melissa, I would have crossed the world. She was my only child, my light through years of solitude after her mother passed. So I walked to the Willow Bistro, the most expensive restaurant in town, my old coat buttoned up and my best shirt ironed beneath it. My shoes were polished, though the leather cracked like dried soil. When I reached the entrance, the valet gave me a cautious look. "Sir, deliveries are around the back." I smiled faintly. "I'm not delivering. I'm meeting my daughter here." He hesitated, eyes scanning me again before forcing a polite nod. "Of course, sir." Inside, warm light spilled over the polished tables and crystal glasses. I spotted Melissa waving from the far end, her smile pure as ever. She looked radiant, grown, confident, and proud. But next to her sat Ethan, the man she loved, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that told me he thought the world revolved around him. "Dad," she stood up, hugging me tightly. "I'm so glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing a grin, though I could feel Ethan's cold gaze sizing me up. When I extended my hand to him, he barely touched it. "Nice to see you again, Mr. Collins," I replied. "Jeremy Collins, right?" he said, tilting his head slightly. "Didn't recognize you without tools or something." Melissa frowned. "Ethan," he laughed, brushing it off. "Kidding, babe. Relax." But it wasn't a joke. Not really. Throughout dinner, he kept making little comments, subtle jabs wrapped in charm. About working-class heroes, about simple tastes, about how some people never learn to upgrade. Melissa tried to keep the peace, though her cheeks burned each time he spoke. When dessert came, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I overheard his voice behind a half-closed door near the bar. "Can you believe it?" Ethan said to one of his friends, laughing. "Her dad looks like a local homeless guy." I swear, when I first saw him, I almost offered him $1. My breath caught in my throat. His friend laughed too. "Man, that's rough." Ethan continued. "Melissa's sweet, but her family's, well, you know. Let's just say I'll be handling the money when we're married." The words stung sharper than any insult I'd heard on the streets. It wasn't just arrogance. It was contempt, the kind that eats through years of pride and sacrifice. I walked back quietly, pretending I'd heard nothing. Melissa smiled at me, unaware that her world had just tilted. I looked at her and realized she had no idea who her fiancé really was. That night, when I left the restaurant, the rain had started to fall. It soaked through my coat, and I let it. It hid the tears that crept down my cheeks. But as I reached home and sat in my small living room, surrounded by blueprints, faded photographs, and a dusty wooden box, something inside me hardened. I opened that box. Inside lay the documents that told another story, one Ethan couldn't begin to imagine. The story of who I truly was, and what I still owned. Tomorrow, I decided, the local homeless person would reveal a truth that would make the whole room fall silent. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of the rain against my window mixed with Ethan's words echoing in my head. Local homeless person. That phrase kept repeating itself, like a cruel joke carved into my thoughts. At dawn, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no milk. My hands trembled slightly, not from age but from anger restrained. On the table lay the old wooden box I had opened the night before, the one that carried everything Ethan didn't know about me. Inside were deeds, certificates, and photographs from my construction years, the same projects that shaped the very town he flaunted his wealth in. I had once led over 200 men, building offices, schools, bridges. But after my wife, Eleanor, died, I withdrew from that life. I sold my company's shares quietly, invested smartly, and lived simply. People thought I'd gone broke. I didn't correct them. There was peace in being invisible. Until now. That morning, I got a call from Melissa. "Dad, are you okay? You left so suddenly last night." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Just tired." "But Melissa, how well do you know Ethan?" There was a pause on the other end. "He can be arrogant sometimes, but he's good to me." "Why?" I didn't want to break her heart with words alone. I needed her to see the truth, not just about Ethan, but about her father. "I'll come by tonight," I said. "I have something to show you both." That evening, I dressed carefully, not in my usual work coat, but in a dark navy blazer I hadn't worn in over 10 years. It still fit, though the fabric smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. I shaved, combed my hair, and stood in front of the mirror. For a moment, I saw the man I used to be, firm, respected, proud. When I arrived at their apartment, Melissa greeted me with her usual warmth. Ethan, however, looked startled to see me looking so different. "Mr. Collins," he said, trying to mask his surprise. "Didn't recognize you. Seems to be a habit of yours," I replied calmly, stepping inside. Melissa frowned. "Dad, what's going on?" I placed the wooden box on their table. "You'll understand soon enough." Ethan gave a sarcastic chuckle. "You brought a box? What is this, story time?" I ignored him, pulling out the first folder. "These," I said, opening the file, "are blueprints from Collins and Sons Construction. We built the Riverside Complex, the Town Hall, the Maple Residences." Ethan blinked, pretending disinterest. "Nice. What's that got to do with you?" "I own the company," I said simply, "until I sold my shares 8 years ago." The silence that followed was thick. Melissa's mouth parted slightly. "Dad, what? You never told me that." I smiled faintly. "I didn't think it mattered. I wanted you to live without the shadow of money or status. But I suppose, in this world, people judge by appearances." Ethan's expression shifted, confusion to discomfort, discomfort to panic. "So you're saying you're wealthy?" "I'm saying," I leaned forward, my eyes steady on his, "that I'm not what you called me." Melissa turned sharply toward him. "What did he call you?" He stuttered. It was just a joke." He must have heard wrong. "I heard every word," I said quietly. "Local homeless person, wasn't it?" Melissa's face drained of color. "Ethan, tell me he's lying." Look, it was just guy talk. I didn't mean it." But the truth had already cracked the foundation of their engagement. I stood, picking up my coat. "You judged a man by his clothes, Ethan. That coat you laughed at once belonged to your father's company's foreman. The same one who gave you your first internship. The man who taught you to pour a foundation." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Wait, you worked with my dad." "I built his headquarters," I said. "He respected hard work." "You mock it." The room fell into silence. Melissa turned away from him, tears in her eyes. I placed a small envelope on the table. "This," I said, "is something I intended to give you both as a wedding gift. The deed to a small house I built for your mother before she passed. But now, I'll hold on to it." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. I walked toward the door. "Jeremy, wait," Melissa whispered. "I didn't know." "I know, sweetheart. But now you do." Before leaving, I turned back one last time. "And Ethan, you should remember something. A man's worth isn't worn on his sleeve. Sometimes, it's hidden under an old coat." Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. The rain had stopped, and the streetlights reflected softly on the wet pavement. I walked home with steady steps, the wooden box under my arm. Lighter now, not because it had fewer papers, but because the weight on my heart had lifted. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Ethan's pride wouldn't allow him to stay humiliated for long. And the next time he tried to strike back, I'd be ready. 2 days passed in uneasy silence. Melissa didn't call, and I didn't expect her to. She needed time. Time to process the man she was about to marry, and the father she thought she knew. I spent those days fixing things around my small house. The faucet in the kitchen. The squeaky step near the porch. The clock that had stopped years ago. Maybe I was trying to fix something inside myself too. The part that still stung from being looked at like dirt. But on the third morning, as I was sweeping the front path, a black SUV pulled up outside my gate. Ethan stepped out, wearing a designer coat, his hair perfectly slicked back. He looked around the small yard with that same faint curl of disgust on his lips. "Morning, Ethan," I said, setting the broom aside. "Surprised to see you here. I figured we should talk, man to man," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, about the other night, it got blown out of proportion. Melissa's upset. I'm trying to make things right. I nodded slowly. Go on. He shoved his hands in his pockets. You embarrassed me, Jeremy. In front of her. In front of everyone, actually. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. I laughed softly. I didn't humiliate you, Ethan. You did that yourself. His jaw tightened. You think you're better than me because you've got money tucked away? Because you played dress-up and caught me off guard? I stepped closer, my voice steady. No. I think I'm better than the man who mocks someone based on what they wear. You have no idea what respect is, Ethan. He gave a low chuckle, eyes narrowing. Respect? You think Melissa wants to live in a world built on old values? She deserves better. Someone who can give her the life she dreams of. Then give her honesty first, I said quietly. It's the one thing money can't buy. He scoffed and turned toward his car. We'll see about that. When he drove away, I noticed something strange. His eyes in the rearview mirror, filled not with guilt but calculation. I'd seen that look before, on men who lost power and couldn't stand it. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Collins? The voice asked. Yes. This is from First Midland Bank. We're calling to verify a mortgage inquiry you filed this morning for the property on Willow Avenue. I froze. I didn't file any mortgage inquiry. The woman paused. That's odd. The paperwork was submitted in your name, with a signature that matched prior documents. It hit me like a blow, Ethan. He'd somehow gotten access to my files, probably through Melissa. She had visited a few times, and the wooden box wasn't always locked. I need that application canceled immediately, I said sharply. And I'll be visiting in person tomorrow. The next morning, I put on that same old brown coat, the one Ethan despised. It had become something of a shield for me now, a reminder of who I really was. At the bank, I sat with the manager, an old acquaintance from my construction days. He examined the documents and whistled. This is a professional forgery, he said. He must have had help. I clenched my fists. Can we trace it? He nodded. If you authorize an internal review, it'll take a few days. Do it, I said, and keep it quiet. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, like the night I first heard Ethan's laughter. But this time, it wasn't sadness I felt. It was purpose. 3 nights later, Melissa came to see me. Her eyes were swollen, and her voice shook. Dad, I don't know what's happening. Ethan's been acting strange. He said he's handling our finances, that you're trying to ruin our wedding. What's going on? I motioned for her to sit. Melissa, you know I'd never hurt you. But Ethan, he's not who you think he is. I showed her the forged papers, the fake mortgage attempt. Her hands trembled as she held them. He did this? But why? Because I exposed him, I said simply. And now he wants revenge. But I won't let him hurt you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Dad, I don't know who to believe anymore. I placed my hand gently on hers. Then come see for yourself. The next day, I invited both of them, Melissa and Ethan, to meet me at the Riverside Development Site, a place filled with cranes, scaffolds, and noise. Ethan had no idea why. He arrived in his usual arrogance, sunglasses on, phone in hand. What's this, a field trip? He sneered. I smiled faintly. You could say that. We stepped into a glass office overlooking the construction site. A young man greeted me warmly. Mr. Collins, we've been waiting for your approval on the final stage. Ethan blinked. Approval? Yes, the foreman said. Mr. Collins owns 51% of this project. Nothing moves without his signature. Melissa turned slowly toward me, eyes wide. Dad, you own this. I nodded. This is the next generation of Riverside. The same town you mocked as small and poor, Ethan, built by people you called nobodies. Ethan's face turned pale. You set me up. No, I said, stepping closer. You set yourself up. You saw a man in an old coat and thought he was beneath you. But that coat built everything you see outside. The room went silent. Only the hum of machines filled the air. Melissa took off her engagement ring, her voice trembling. Ethan, I can't marry someone who treats my father, or anyone, like that. He looked at her, then at me, his face burning red with anger and humiliation. Without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. After they left, I walked to the balcony. The evening sun glowed across the skyline, a skyline I had once built and now rebuilt again in spirit. I wasn't a local homeless person. I was a man who'd lost much, yes, but never my integrity. And for the first time in years, I felt something heavy lift from my chest. But I also knew Ethan wasn't done. Pride that big doesn't die quietly. And as the wind picked up again over the steel and dust of Riverside, I felt it, a storm still coming. It had been a week since that confrontation at the construction site. Melissa stayed with me for a few days, quiet, fragile, trying to untangle the threads of her life that Ethan had knotted with lies. She barely spoke about him, but I could see the storm behind her eyes. Love doesn't vanish overnight, even when it's betrayed. I spent those evenings cooking for her, just like when she was a child, soup simmering on the stove, the soft hum of old jazz in the background. But every time my phone buzzed, I could feel the tension return. Ethan had started calling again. At first, I ignored him. Then the messages came, angry, desperate, manipulative. You ruined my life, old man. Melissa will see what kind of liar you really are. You think that coat makes you humble? It just hides your shame. The last one almost made me laugh. It was proof of how little he understood. Still, I could sense something darker behind his words. Men like Ethan don't just accept defeat, they scheme in silence. A few days later, I was having coffee on my porch when my neighbor, Mrs. Kendall, came rushing over. "Jeremy, have you seen the news?" she asked, clutching her phone. I frowned. "No, why?" She handed me the screen. There it was, an online article with the headline, "Local builder accused of tax fraud and hidden wealth." And beneath it, a photo of me, cropped from years ago, looking unkempt, tired, the kind of photo that fit the story Ethan wanted to tell. My stomach turned cold. I read further. The article claimed that I had hidden assets, falsified business reports, and cheated workers. It was a full smear campaign, and only one person had enough spite and money to spread it this fast. Ethan. That evening, Melissa came home early. Her face was pale. "Dad, what is this?" "Ethan sent me the article. He says you stole from your own company." I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, look at me." She met my eyes reluctantly. "I built that company from the ground up. I paid every man fair wages. I never took a penny I didn't earn. Ethan's doing this to make you doubt me, and to save what's left of his pride." Tears filled her eyes. "He said you'd do anything to destroy him." I shook my head. "No, Melissa. I'm just showing him who he really is." She looked away. "I want to believe you, Dad. I really do." I walked to the shelf and pulled out an old folder, tax records, contracts, and letters from inspectors confirming my clean record. I placed it in front of her. "This is the truth. Black and white. The rest is just noise." She flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. He made all this up. Yes. And now he's about to learn that lies can only stand until the truth decides to walk in. The next morning, I made a few calls, quiet, strategic ones. One to an old journalist friend, Tom Rivera, who had once covered my construction projects. Another to a man named Graham, my former accountant. Both owed me favors, but more importantly, they knew who I truly was. By sunset, Tom had promised to publish a correction with proof. He even sounded excited. "Jeremy, this'll make waves. People love seeing liars exposed." I only replied, "Do it gently, Tom. I don't want revenge. I want peace." But inside, I knew that peace sometimes requires precision. 3 days later, Ethan's world started to crack. Tom's article hit first, a detailed piece titled, "Truth Behind the Rumors, The Man Who Built Riverside." It told the real story, about the honest foreman who became a builder, who donated half his fortune to local housing charities, and who lived modestly not out of shame, but choice. By evening, Ethan's business associates had begun to pull away. Sponsors canceled deals. His social media, once full of confidence, turned silent. The story had flipped, and the man who'd laughed at an old coat now looked smaller than ever. But I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone self-destruct, even if he'd earned it. I'd seen pride destroy better men than Ethan. That night, Melissa came into my study. She sat quietly for a moment, then said, "He called me today? He said you ruined his life." I sighed. "And what did you tell him?" She looked up, her voice steady. "That he did that himself." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not with triumph, but with relief. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." She leaned over and hugged me tightly. "I see it now. You weren't fighting him. You were protecting me." "I always was," I said softly. The next morning, I received a letter. It wasn't from Ethan. It was from his father, Richard Hayes, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. We had built skyscrapers together once. The letter was short. Jeremy, I heard what happened. My son forgot the lessons his old man taught him. I'm ashamed, but I'm grateful you showed him the truth the hard way. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. I folded the letter slowly, staring at the ink. It seemed like fate had come full circle, but something in me hesitated. I had revealed the truth, defended my name, and taught Ethan a lesson, but I still wondered, could a man like that truly change? As I watched the sunrise spill golden light across my small yard, I realized my quiet revenge was almost done. Almost, but not yet. There was one final thing left to say to Ethan. Not in anger, in clarity, and it would happen face to face. 3 mornings later, I received a text that simply read, "We need to talk. Alone. Ethan." No threats. No arrogance. Just those few words, quiet, stripped of his usual pride. I thought about ignoring it, but something in me said it was time. Time to finish what started that night in the restaurant. I agreed to meet him at Riverside Park, the same place where I used to take Melissa when she was a child. The place where everything had once been simple, before pride and shame and wealth twisted life into something else. The morning air was sharp and bright. Dew sparkled on the benches, and pigeons scattered when I walked by. Ethan stood near the fountain, his expensive coat gone. He looked tired, eyes shadowed, hair uncombed, a man who had finally run out of masks. When he saw me, he hesitated before speaking. "You came," he said quietly. "I said I would," I replied. "You wanted to talk." He nodded, glancing down at the ground. I didn't expect things to go this far. The media, my investors, even my dad called me yesterday. He said I should apologize to you. "Maybe he's right," I said. He looked up, his jaw trembling slightly. I was angry, embarrassed. "I thought you were mocking me in front of Melissa, trying to ruin what I had. I didn't realize that your arrogance was doing the job for you." I finished gently. He flinched, but didn't deny it. "Yeah, something like that." He ran a hand through his hair. "When that article came out about me, when everyone turned their backs, I finally understood what you were trying to teach me. I thought success was about what you wear, where you eat, who you impress. But you had all that once, and you walked away from it." I looked toward the trees swaying in the breeze. Because it stopped meaning anything after my wife died. I realized no one remembers what you own, only how you treat people. He swallowed hard. "I treated you terribly. And Melissa, I don't think she'll ever forgive me." "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for," I said. "It's something you earn." Slowly. He nodded, staring at the water. "I lost her, didn't I?" I sighed. "You didn't lose her because of money, Ethan. You lost her because she saw the man behind it." He was silent for a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I brought this," he said. "It's proof I retracted everything. The fake mortgage, the online rumors. I told the bank and the press the truth. I took it, not because I needed it, but because I could see he needed me too." "Thank you," I said simply. He took a deep breath. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. What pride costs. What respect means." I studied his face, the same one that once looked at me with mockery, now soft, almost fragile. "Ethan," I said after a pause, "there's something you still need to learn." He frowned. "What's that?" "That the people you step on while climbing are the same ones who could have caught you when you fell. Never forget that." He nodded slowly. "I won't." We stood there for a while in silence, just 2 men who had seen too much of themselves in the other. Eventually, Ethan turned to leave. "Tell Melissa I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "Not for losing her, but for not being the man she thought I was." "I will," I said softly. "And Ethan, don't waste what you've learned. Make it count." He gave a faint nod and walked away. The sun broke through the clouds as his figure grew smaller, swallowed by the city he once thought he owned. That evening, Melissa stopped by. She found me sitting on the porch, sipping tea, staring at the fading light. "Dad," she said gently, "I heard you met with him." "I did." She hesitated. "Did he say anything?" "Yes," I said after a moment. "He said he's sorry." She sat beside me quietly. "Do you believe him?" I thought about that. I believe he's broken enough to understand. And sometimes, that's where change begins. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You always find good in people." I smiled faintly. "Not good, potential. Everyone has it. Most just bury it under fear or pride. We watched the sunset together. The sky burned gold, then faded into deep blue, the same color as the coat I wore to her mother's funeral, the same color as the life I'd chosen. Simple, quiet, honest. After a while, Melissa whispered, "You know, Dad, I used to be embarrassed that we didn't live like other families. But now, I'm proud." I turned to her, emotion tightening my throat. "You've no idea how much that means to me." She smiled. Mom would have been proud too. For the first time in months, my heart felt still. Not victorious, not bitter, just still. Later that night, as I locked up the house, I paused by the closet where my old brown coat hung. Its edges were frayed, the fabric rough, but it had carried me through storms, both weather and human. I brushed my fingers over the collar and smiled. People often mistake silence for weakness, modesty for poverty, and kindness for foolishness. But silence, I've learned, can be sharper than any blade. Because when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't need to shout. A month passed. The air of early spring had softened the cold edges of Riverside. Trees bloomed near the park again, and laughter returned to the streets. Life, as it always does, moved forward, even after storms. Melissa had started a new job at the local library. She said it felt peaceful there, surrounded by stories instead of expectations. I saw her smile more often, and though there were still traces of heartbreak in her eyes, they no longer carried shame, only growth. As for me, I returned to my quiet life. Mornings began with the creak of my old kettle, afternoons with a walk by the river. I even started sketching again, little designs for houses I'd never build but still saw in my mind. I thought that would be the end of the story. But one afternoon, as I was patching the garden fence, a familiar voice called from the gate. "Mr. Collins." I turned. Ethan stood there. His clothes were simple this time. Jeans, a gray shirt. No arrogance, no polished shoes. Just a man. He held out a piece of paper. "I found something that belongs to you." I wiped my hands and took it. It was the old blueprint of a house I designed years ago, Eleanor's house, the one I'd built for my late wife. "I thought you said you didn't want to see me again," I said. He nodded. "I didn't, but I wanted to return this. Melissa told me it was your last project before you retired." I looked down at the drawing, the curved porch, the bay window where Eleanor used to sit with her tea. "Where did you find it?" "In your old office," he said. "The one near the construction site. The team let me in. I'm helping there now, just small work. I wanted to understand what real building feels like." I stared at him for a long moment. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now rough, calloused, with dust under the nails. "You're working?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Started 2 weeks ago. I asked your old foreman, Graham, to take me on. Told him not to go easy on me." "And did he?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Not for a second." We stood in silence for a while, the only sound being the wind rustling through the leaves. Then I said, "Pride is heavy, isn't it? Harder to lift than any beam." He let out a small laugh. "You're right. I carried it for so long I didn't notice it was crushing me." I studied him, really studied him, and saw something I hadn't before. Humility. Not the kind that pretends, but the kind that aches to rebuild. "Ethan," I said finally, "what you're doing, it's the only apology that means anything." He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. You could have made my life miserable." "I didn't need to," I said. "You were doing that just fine on your own." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes after tears. "I guess I was." He turned to leave, then stopped. "By the way," he said quietly, "Melissa's stronger than you think. You raised her well." I watched him walk down the road until he disappeared behind the trees. That evening, Melissa came over for dinner. We ate on the porch, roasted chicken, her favorite, and talked about small things, the town fair, her co-workers, a new bookstore opening nearby. But as the light faded, she asked softly, "Did he come today?" "Yes," I said. "He's working at the Riverside site." Her fork paused midair. "You're kidding." "No. He's actually doing honest work. I saw the dirt on his hands." She exhaled slowly. "That's unexpected. People can change, Melissa. Sometimes life breaks them in the right places." She smiled sadly. "Do you think I should talk to him again?" I took a moment before answering. "If you do, talk not as someone who once loved him, but as someone who's learned. Let him see who you became." She nodded. You always find a way to make things sound like lessons. That's what fathers do, I said. After she left, I stayed outside long after the streetlights came on. The night was warm, the stars faint but steady. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint hum of machines from the riverside site, the city still growing, still moving. I thought about all that had happened. The insult, the humiliation, the revenge that wasn't really revenge but revelation. I had once believed silence was weakness, but now I understood silence was strategy. When you let truth speak for itself, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs patience. A few weeks later, I visited Eleanor's grave. The grass was tall, the stones still smooth from years of careful cleaning. I placed a single white rose and said quietly, "I think you'd be proud. Melissa's wiser now. So am I. And the boy who hurt her is learning to build, this time with his hands, not his ego." The wind picked up gently, rustling the trees around me. For a moment, I could almost feel her presence, calm, forgiving, like the warmth of sunlight on my shoulders. As I walked away, I thought about that old brown coat still hanging by the door at home. Maybe someday, I'd give it to someone else, someone who'd need to learn what it really meant. For now, I simply smiled. The revenge was never in destroying him. It was in staying kind while the truth did the talking. And in the end, that truth gave me something I hadn't felt in years: peace. A year can wash away a lot of pain, or simply teach you how to live with it. Riverside looked different now. The construction site I once showed Ethan was complete. Tall glass buildings gleamed against the river, and a bronze plaque at the entrance read Collins Square, dedicated to the builders of honest hands. It wasn't my idea. The town council had done it, surprising me with a ceremony last autumn. Melissa stood beside me that day, teary-eyed, holding my hand as the curtain dropped to reveal the plaque. But I didn't need recognition. My reward had already come, in the form of peace, simplicity, and my daughter's steady smile every morning she visited. She'd changed too. She laughed more easily now, talked about her job at the library with a spark I hadn't seen since she was a child. People came to her for advice, and I often caught her repeating my old lines. Patience is stronger than pride. Still, every now and then, I'd notice her glance toward the street when a black car passed. There was still a corner of her heart that remembered. It was early March when she walked into my kitchen one morning, a folded newspaper in her hand. "Dad," she said, her voice oddly quiet, "you're not going to believe this." She laid the paper on the table. On the front page was a photo of a man standing in front of a half-finished community center, hair messy, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in cement. The headline read, "Former investor leads free housing project for low-income families." The man was Ethan Hayes. I stared at the picture for a long while. His eyes looked older, but calm. The kind of calm that only comes from falling hard and climbing back the right way. "Looks like he learned," I murmured. Melissa nodded slowly. "He's been doing this for 6 months. He sold his company, donated most of the money to the project. They say he lives in one of the cabins on site." I met her eyes. "Do you want to see him?" She hesitated. "Part of me does. Part of me's afraid." Afraid of what? That he really changed. Because then I'll have to remember how much I cared. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "If he's changed, it's because life taught him what we couldn't. And if you go not for him, but for yourself." 2 days later, she did. She told me later how it went. She'd arrived at the project site on the edge of town, where rows of half-built homes stood under the sun. Ethan had been working alongside a group of volunteers, lifting beams, laughing, not the empty laugh I remembered, but a real one. When he saw her, he froze mid-step. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. Melissa said she didn't know what to say at first, but he spoke gently. No apologies rehearsed, no grand gestures. He just told her about the families they were helping, about the joy of seeing people move into homes built with honest effort. "I wanted to build something real this time," he said. "Not for profit, for people." She told me she saw the truth in his eyes. And when she left, she felt lighter, not because the past was fixed, but because it no longer hurt. That evening, she sat with me on the porch again. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. "You were right, Dad," she said. "People can change, but only if life breaks them first." I smiled. "It's not the breaking that changes them, Melissa. It's what they build afterward." She looked at me, her face soft in the fading light. He said he wants to invite you to the opening ceremony next month. I chuckled. Me? He said the first house wouldn't exist without the lesson you gave him. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I nodded. Maybe it's time to see what he's built. That night, when I turned off the lights, I glanced again at the old brown coat hanging by the door. I hadn't worn it in months, but I decided I would the day I went to that ceremony. Not as a symbol of poverty or shame, but as proof that even the things the world mocks can carry dignity. The coat once hit a man. Now it told his story. And maybe, when I saw Ethan again, he'd finally understand that truth, not through my words, but through who he'd become. The morning of the ceremony came with golden light spilling through my curtains. Spring had truly arrived. That kind of morning when the air itself feels alive, carrying the hum of fresh starts. I hadn't planned on dressing up much, but something inside me said this day was different. I took my time. Clean shirt, polished shoes, the old brown coat brushed and neat. As I buttoned it, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled faintly. Strange, I thought. The same coat that once made people turn away now makes them listen. Melissa picked me up around 10. She looked radiant, calm and certain, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in years. As she drove, we passed the familiar sights of Riverside, streets I'd helped build, corners that carried pieces of my life. When we reached the community site, I froze for a moment. The place was beautiful. Rows of small houses lined a freshly paved lane, each one painted soft pastel colors, with flowers planted in neat front gardens. Children ran between them, chasing a stray dog. A large banner stretched across the main entrance. Hayes Foundation, building hope together. And there he was, Ethan, standing near the first finished house, shaking hands with volunteers, smiling like a man reborn. When he noticed me, he paused mid-sentence. His expression flickered, surprise, then something that looked like gratitude. He walked over slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Mr. Collins," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I replied, smiling. But my daughter insisted. Melissa grinned softly beside me. I figured someone needed to see how far he's come. Ethan nodded to her, then turned back to me. "I'm glad you did. This place, it started because of you." I raised an eyebrow. "Because of me?" He nodded. "That night, when you told me that silence can be sharper than any blade, I didn't understand. I thought silence was surrender. But now I get it. You let the truth do the talking." I smiled faintly. And what did the truth say? That I'd been living like a man wearing another man's skin. Everything fake, everything borrowed. I needed to strip it all away to see who I really was. He gestured toward the houses. "These people, they remind me of who I used to look down on. But now, when I hand them keys to their first home, I see something I never did before, respect. Not for me, but for what I'm doing." Melissa's eyes softened. "You built this from nothing." He looked at her. "No, I built it from a mistake, and a man who refused to destroy me for it." When the ceremony began, a small crowd gathered under a white canopy. The mayor spoke briefly about the project, praising Ethan's work and dedication. Then, to my surprise, she called me to the stage. "Mr. Collins," she said, "without your values, this wouldn't exist. Would you do us the honor of cutting the ribbon?" The crowd clapped. Melissa's hands were the loudest among them. Ethan handed me the scissors, his eyes steady. "You should do it," he whispered. "You taught me to build something real." As I cut the ribbon, the crowd cheered. Children rushed inside the house, their laughter echoing like bells. I stepped back, feeling something stir deep inside. Not pride exactly, but peace. A full circle quietly closing. After the ceremony, Ethan approached again, holding a small wooden box. "I made this for you," he said. Inside was a miniature model of one of the new homes, perfectly carved, every detail precise. On its tiny porch sat a man in a brown coat, smiling at a little girl holding a flower. Underneath, an engraving read, "To Jeremy Collins, who taught me what it means to build with honor." I felt a lump form in my throat. This is beautiful." He shrugged. "It's not enough, but it's honest." "It's more than enough," I said quietly. As the sun began to set, Melissa and I walked through the new street lined with homes. She looked around, her eyes shining. "Dad, this feels like something out of Mom's dreams. She'd have loved this." "She would," I said, smiling softly. She always believed the world could be rebuilt if people learned how to care again. Melissa slipped her arm through mine. I think that's what you both taught him. I looked back at Ethan, now talking to a group of children, laughing freely, dirt still on his hands. For the first time, I saw him not as the arrogant man who'd mocked me, but as a builder, like I once was. And maybe, just maybe, that was the truest revenge of all, watching someone you once pitied become the kind of man you could finally respect. That night, back home, I placed the little wooden model beside Eleanor's framed photograph. The light from the lamp caught the engraved words, and I whispered, "We did good, love. We built more than houses, we built people." The coat hung quietly by the door, its fabric worn, its story complete. But for the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of pain or endurance. I saw it as a badge of truth. And truth, I realized, never grows old. The weeks after the ceremony passed quietly, almost too quietly. Riverside was alive with the hum of hammers and laughter from the new community, but my own house had fallen back into its old rhythm. Soft jazz from the radio, the smell of coffee, the creak of the front step. At first, I thought the heaviness in my chest was just age catching up with me. After all, I was nearing 60, and the years had their ways of reminding me I wasn't as strong as I used to be. But the cough came first, low, persistent, deep. Then the faint pain that made me stop mid-step while climbing the porch. Melissa noticed before I did. "Dad," she said one evening, "you've been pale all week. I'm calling Dr. Harris tomorrow." "No need," I insisted, forcing a smile. "Just a little cold." But she wasn't convinced. The next morning, I found her already dressed, keys in hand. "We're going." No arguments. And so we went. The doctor's office smelled like disinfectant and worry. Dr. Harris, an old friend of mine from my construction days, looked at me with the kind of expression that said he'd seen too much. "Jeremy," he said after a few tests, "your heart's tired. Nothing catastrophic, but you've been overworking it for years without realizing. Stress, manual labor, skipped meals, it adds up." I sat quietly, staring at the monitor behind him that showed the slow rhythm of my pulse. So what now? Rest. Medication. No heavy lifting, no long hours. And most importantly, no stress. I chuckled softly. "Doc, that's like telling the river not to flow." He smiled faintly. "Then at least let it flow slower." Melissa was silent the entire drive home. When we parked, she turned off the engine but didn't move. "You should have told me, Dad." "I didn't know." "You should have noticed," she burst out, tears already forming. "You take care of everyone else, but never yourself." Her words cut deep because they were true. I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "Hey, I'm not going anywhere just yet. You hear me?" She sniffed, nodding. "Promise. Promise." The following days were strange. I slowed down, not by choice, but by necessity. My morning walks became shorter, my evenings quieter. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, watching the light move across the floor, feeling time in a way I never had before. It wasn't fear I felt, just an awareness that life is more fragile than we ever admit. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I heard from Melissa," he said. "Thought you might need company." I gestured toward the porch. "Come on, then. I've got the best view in town." We sat in silence for a while, watching the street. Kids were playing ball down the road, their laughter echoing through the spring air. "I don't know how you do it," Ethan said finally. "Stay so calm. If I were in your place, I'd be terrified." "I've already lived through worse," I said. "Losing Eleanor, nearly losing Melissa, this is just another hill to climb." He nodded, then handed me an envelope. "I've been meaning to give you this." Inside was a document, a legal one. Property deed transfer. I frowned. "What's this?" "It's for one of the new community houses. I want you to have it. No media, no plaque. Just a place in your name, forever." I shook my head. "Ethan, I don't need." "You do," he interrupted softly. "You gave me everything I didn't deserve. Let me do this one thing for you." There was no pride in his voice this time, just quiet sincerity. I folded the paper carefully. "You've come a long way, son." He smiled faintly. "You taught me how to build. Now I just want to make sure you have something to rest in when you're done building." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from pain, but from gratitude. I walked into the living room, turned on the lamp, and looked at the model house Ethan had made for me. The little man in the brown coat and the girl with the flower. I thought about all the things I'd built in my life. Houses, bridges, reputations, and realized none of them compared to this, rebuilding broken people. The next morning, I started a journal. I wanted to leave something behind for Melissa. Not money, not property, but words. Lessons, memories, the small pieces of wisdom that had carried me through. The first line I wrote was simple. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a strength that never grows old. Over the next few weeks, Ethan visited often. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes blueprints, sometimes just silence. He never stayed long, but every time he left, he'd say the same thing. See you tomorrow, Mr. Collins. And every time, I'd answer, you'd better. Melissa began to relax again. I could see it in her shoulders, in the way she laughed more easily, her eyes softer when she looked at me. I knew I was healing, not just my heart, but the parts of me that had carried too much for too long. But deep down, I also knew something else. Time was moving slower now, yes, but it was still moving. And I had just enough left to make sure the people I loved were ready when it moved on without me. The last days of summer came quietly that year. The air grew thick with the smell of cut grass and evening rain, and my garden, the one I'd neglected for so long, came back to life under Melissa's hands. She planted daisies by the fence, the same flowers Eleanor used to love. Every time I saw them, I felt her presence, gentle and near. My health had steadied. I wasn't strong, but I wasn't fading either. I moved slower, rested more, and spoke softer. I'd started to think of my days not as dwindling hours, but as gifts, small, ordinary, but precious. And then, one afternoon, Ethan arrived again, this time with a camera crew and a nervous smile. Don't glare at me, he said before I could speak. It's not for fame. The network's doing a documentary on the housing project, and I told them they couldn't film a single thing unless they met the man who started it all. I didn't start anything, I said, pouring him coffee. You did. He smiled. You just don't know how loud your silence was, Mr. Collins. They filmed for hours, my old photographs, the blueprint sketches, my worn tools, the plaque at Collins Square. I didn't say much. I let them tell the story in their own way. But when the interviewer asked me what revenge meant to me, I gave the only answer I had. Revenge, I said, smiling faintly. It's when life gives you a chance to prove someone wrong, and you choose to prove them right instead. Right, that goodness still exists. Right, that honesty still matters. That's the only revenge worth having. The interviewer fell silent. Ethan looked down, blinking hard. After they left, he stayed behind. We sat outside as the sunset spilled orange light across the porch. Melissa told me you've been writing something, he said quietly. I nodded. A journal. For her. Maybe for you too. He tilted his head. For me. I chuckled softly. Well, you're part of the story now. Might as well be written in ink. He laughed, the easy, unguarded laugh of a man who no longer wore armor. That night, after he left, I sat at my desk and opened the leather-bound notebook. I'd been writing for months, page after page of memories, lessons, confessions. But that evening, I knew it was time to write the final entry. August 24th. If you're reading this, Melissa, it means I've gone where your mother's been waiting. Don't be sad. You've both given me more peace than I thought I'd ever find. I've learned that we spend the first half of our lives building walls and the second half learning how to open doors. I used to think dignity meant keeping quiet when the world mocked you. Now I know it means forgiving without forgetting, loving without expecting anything back. If Ethan's reading this too, remember, you don't owe me a thing. But promise me this, keep building homes, not empires. Build hearts, not reputations. That's what lasts. And when people call you weak for being kind, smile. That's when you'll know you've become stronger than they ever were. I closed the book, my hands trembling slightly, but not from sadness. From gratitude. I'd lived long enough to see change, redemption, and love return full circle. Weeks later, I grew weaker. Melissa stayed with me most nights, reading aloud from old journals, humming softly like her mother once did. I didn't tell her how much her voice kept me here longer than I deserved. One night, I asked her to open the window. The air was cool, carrying the faint sound of children laughing somewhere far away, the ones living in the houses Ethan built. Dad, she whispered, are you scared? No, I said quietly. Just grateful. She smiled through her tears. For what? For having enough time to fix what mattered. I reached for her hand, felt her warmth, and whispered, promise me something, sweetheart. Keep helping people who forget what kindness feels like. Remind them. I promise, she said, her voice breaking. The next morning, the house was still. The coffee pot sat cold, the radio silent. The daisies by the fence swayed gently in the wind. Melissa found the journal on the desk, open to the last line. It read, "A man's worth isn't in what he leaves behind, but in who he leaves standing stronger." She pressed her hand to the page, tears falling freely, and whispered, "Goodbye, Dad." A month later, the community center held a small memorial in my name. Ethan spoke last. No suits, no papers, just raw words. Jeremy Collins taught me that you can rebuild anything, even a man, if you do it with patience. He didn't punish me. He made me see myself. And because of him, hundreds of families have a home today, including me. He paused, his voice catching. He once said silence can be sharper than any blade. I think now I understand. It doesn't cut, it heals. The camera panned to the bronze plaque by the main house. Beneath Collins Square, someone had added a new inscription, built by hands that forgave. And on the porch of the first home, a small statue stood, a man in a brown coat, smiling toward the rising sun. The legend beneath it read, "He built peace where pride once lived." And so, the quiet man who once walked Riverside streets unseen became the town's heart. Not because he sought revenge, but because he taught others that forgiveness was the truest form of it.